Hi. So best get started. So some of you are still here from the map session. So I'll just give a quick introduction. My name's Jamie Maguire. I'm a software architect and web developer by trade. And today, what I'd like to share with everybody in the room is a little bit of an introduction to Microsoft Cognitive Services, more specifically text analytics and language understanding. And I'm going to touch on sentiment analysis. Just by like a raise of hands, is anybody familiar with sentiment analysis and text analytics? And okay, is anybody like using it in production, or anybody building any MVPs or prototypes yet? Okay. So, in fact, is anybody using Microsoft Cognitive Services in any of the products at the moment? Right. Okay, so quick introduction to Microsoft Cognitive Services. They're a collection of services that exist in the cloud, and they generally reside in like five kind of main areas, that being vision, speech, knowledge, search, and language. And what you can do is you can pull these services down from the web, and then you can easily integrate them into your existing products or solutions to like augment their intelligence. So you can build anything from chatbots to APIs that mine social media data. You can quickly build services that allow you to configure Q&A services. So you don't need to like handcraft and hand code dictionaries of questions and answers or write queries. You get a lot of that out of the box. But before I kind of dive into like the nuts and bolts of it, like my background for about the past maybe 6 or 7 years has been in mining social media data, more specifically Twitter. So back in about 2015 or maybe 2014, I worked in a research project, and the whole idea behind that was, or what came out of that research actually was an API that I could point at data, whether it be social, whether it be textual, or just on regular documents, and infer the sentiment and the keywords that existed in that body of text. And the whole idea and premise of that API was to identify commercial intent or positive sentiment or negative sentiment, and that was the idea was to be used for marketers and or to be able to help identify brand advocates or even crisis management. A web front end was put on front of that API at a later date, which gave users like the ability to monitor the real-time sentiment of how their product or their brand or service was being perceived online, and then corrective action could be taken. So what you can see basically here is there's a real-time line graph of like 0 being negative, 1 being positive. So like, I really love this phone, I really hate this phone. And you can that's almost like a stop ticker, and that would update in real time. And the long and short of that research was, as I say, was an API in a web solution that was sent off to Twitter, who then invited me over to their HQ to then demo and present and show them the product that I'd built. But to get to that point, to arrive at that number, it was a ton of work, like a real ton of work. Like I had to build the data model, I had to source the training data, I had to remove the stop words, the noise words. I then had to train it, I then had to test it, and even then I was only able to get it to about 70 or 80% accuracy. And for like the techies in the room, it used an algorithm called Bayesian theorem, and it's all about probabilities, and it's based on what you've seen prior is what is going to have an effect on what you're going to process in the future. But there were quite a few challenges, okay, and one being it just didn't scale. I couldn't scale. The training data constantly had to be updated. Was another thing. So it was just a ton of work, and the data model had to be changed quite a bit. And so that's the background as to my experience in this area. But rather than me just talk about the stuff that I built, what I want to share with everybody in the room is like how you can use Microsoft Cognitive Services to actually remove all of that headache and all that pain, and then just pull an API off the shelf. This was maybe, as I say, between 2013 to 2015, and it was around about 2016 that these APIs really started to hit production. So what I'd like to do is 2 or 3 things. Is like show you them in these services in Azure, a quick demo in Postman, and then another demo in C# for the developers in the audience that will show you how quickly it is to actually consume this intelligence in a few REST API calls. So you don't need to build a data model, you don't need to source the training data, you don't need to clean it, and you don't need to constantly test it, because it's all up in the cloud for you. So I'm gonna hop out of the slide deck, and I'm gonna jump into. I won't go into Azure because there's not too much to actually see there other than setting up the service and pulling down the app key. But I'll jump into Postman, and what we'll do is we'll see how easy it is to send over a stream of text, to consume the API, and then to get the response back from the service, and then the intelligence that it brings. For the people that were in on the location services sort of session, it's a little bit similar in terms of consuming it. So again, it is a little bit hard to see here, right? But so what you do is like you get your endpoint, right, and then you pass in your text. Okay, you obviously set your content type and your key, which you can get via Azure, right, when you provision the service. But what we're looking at is we're going to send the request to the endpoint, and then we're going to send over the text. And I do apologise, it is quite hard to see, but it says Microsoft build was great, and what I would expect from that would be a score of like greater than 0.95 or something, right? Because it's pretty obvious like what that suggests, it's positive. I mean, if you run that, and we're going to send this request over to the API, we've hit it, and then we get a response. We don't have any errors, thank God, right? But we get a score, and it's 0.99. And I know it's only a number, right? But to get at that number, it's like a ton of work. Like I know because I've done it, right? And what I got to, so I was building this product, and when these APIs started to hit the market, I just started to swap out the custom code that I had written in favour for the APIs, because I didn't want the headache of maintaining the data model. I didn't want the headache of sourcing training data. I had other things to focus on. So I started to swap the custom code out for these API calls.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is it possible to up the contrast on there? To me, that's a little bit. The brilliance is a bit high.
What about?
The contrast a little bit.
Does that help? Is that helping? No.
Don't worry.
Okay. So sentiment is one thing that you can pull out from it. Okay. Other bits of functionality you've got are key phrases and entities. And I think for developers, entities are pretty, in fact, they're really interesting, right? Because you don't just get back the entities that are in the content, you also get other bits of metadata that you can then do other lookups on, right? So I'll skip over like the key phrases aspect, right? And we've got the same text. Microsoft build was great. We're not doing sentiment, we're doing entities. If we run that, okay, we get, I'll just try and get some contrast going here. So you get a response back, and then you get a note here that says entities. Excuse me. You got name, build. Well, and the API's figured out that build is a developer conference all by itself. It even tells you the exact location of the text. So you've got the coordinates, like 0 and 15. But this is where the cool stuff is actually. Further down, you've got access to other resources online that contain more information about the entities that have been discovered as a part of this API. So you can then do another lookup. And actually, just thinking off the cuff here, what you could do is you could take this Wikipedia URL, you could use the Bing web search API to then make a request. Then you could parse out the body of the Wikipedia page, run text analytics over it again, and then find out even more insights based on other keywords and stuff, right? So you can start to stack these APIs up. But that's enough about Postman, because I've already run through a couple examples of that. The next thing I'd want to show is that if you're coding this stuff, well, how do you consume it? Like how many lines of code? How many? What sort of patterns do you look for? So I'm going to go into Visual Studio, right? And I've got I've got a console application again, and what we're going to, so I've got three streams of text. I love this new iPhone, I can't stand this. I'm undecided. So I'm expecting that I'll get like 0.9 or greater than 0.9, less than 0.5, and then I'll get maybe somewhere in the middle of the line for that, right? Third one. So if I run it, right. We're just going to get this data. So it's worked, right? We've got 0.98, we've got 0.19, and we've got 0.50. Well, and I would kind of agree with that, right? So 0.50 being middle of the road, like indifference, which is relatively accurate. So it's worked, but let's have a look at the code, right? So what we got, I don't know, like maybe 10 or 15 lines of code here to consume the APIs, again for the developers. You get a few different ways that you can consume them. You can construct the low-level requests yourself, or you can consume the dedicated SDKs, which are common through all of the Cognitive Services stack. So you get different options. My personal preference is to handcraft. It must just be the developer in me, right? But this example here has got the SDK, so it shields you from a lot of the low-level work. So it's about 10 lines of code. You set up your key. You tell the which region you want to point to. I've picked Western Europe here, and then you run it. You invoke it, and then you pass in your text, and then you get the result back. And then it loops through. So it's, if you're a developer and you're thinking about maybe integrating like a sentiment analysis component to your software solution, it's like the barrier to entry is pretty low. Like you don't need to go through a lot of the pain that I went through like 5-6 years ago. You can just pull these off the shelf.
Are these examples online? Or?
Yeah. I've got a GitHub repo, and if you want like a further or a deeper dive into like some of this stuff, there's a series of blogs that run through a set of tutorials on the Grey Matter website that you can check out. As I say, there's a accompanying code as well to supplement the blogs.
Have they built in colloquialisms and cultural things? This iPhone is sick.
So, well, that's a good question, right? So one of the things that I found, right, see when I was doing like sentiment analysis, right, is that certain nuances of the English language are real tricky to process, right? What you'll find is that, and I'm going to lead on to this in the second half of this session, is there's some other techniques that you can employ, right? So sentiment analysis is one thing, but NLP and language understanding is the other. There's techniques like part speech tagging, which is one of the things that I found helped. But for sentiment, I found that you got to have examples of positive, obviously, right, negative. But the third one was indifference. If you're building a custom classifier, you got to, and this was one of the headaches. This is why what I had built couldn't scale, because there was like an endless amount of buckets and classifiers that had to be built. But there's another technology stack called LUIS, which is a language understanding intelligence service, and with that you can create, and I'm kind of bleeding in a little bit into the next step, but you can create a custom language model, and if you train it, it can identify these patterns. Is that, yeah? So that was a quick run through about how you can consume the sentiment analysis aspect of it. It's the same for entities and the same for keyword extraction. Okay, I really like it because it just saves me a ton of work. And this leads nicely on to the next section. which is the language understanding intelligence service, right? So this was back in 2016 when I submitted this to the guys at Twitter, but 2017 there was another initiative, and like the social listening landscape is kind of saturated at the minute, right? Everybody's, like, not everybody, but a lot of people are doing it. And one of the things that came out of the discussions with the guys was that being able to target the right person at the right time with the right creative or marketing message was more important than just listening for sentiment. So I got to work, and is anybody familiar with part of speech tagging? Yeah. So there's quite a lot of challenges associated with like processing human text. Some of them that we've just mentioned, like sarcasm and cultural differences and what have you. And it's not always clear like what the person means because of those differences. But there are certain things that you can do after you've trained and cleansed your data. And this is actually live data. So up at the top part of the slide here, this is a query with a tweet ID, and this is the actual tweet. Anyone have an iPhone for sale, need to replace ... and I can't remember what the rest of that was. But what I'd done was I built this part of speech tagging library, and what it done was, and the associated data model, and it parsed out each word. And what the part of speech tagging component does was it annotates each word in the sentence with a tag or a code, whether it be nouns, pronouns, or verbs. And then what you can do is you can, when you got having the data in that format makes it easier for the machine to understand. Okay, and when you got codes like that, you can start to pattern match. As you can start to pattern match, you can start to build an API around these combinations. And just to set some context, what I was interested in was like identifying commercial intent. Okay, so anyone have an iPhone for sale? Well, chances are that person might be looking to buy a new iPhone, right? So, and that worked like to a point. And what I would do is I would harvest the users in their metadata, and then I would be able to, with some automation, inject creative into their timelines dynamically and build audiences. But again, that wasn't without its problems. Like, for the same reasons that I found in the sentiment analysis, I couldn't code for any of the all the possible combinations. The data was going to have to change. But this is where Lewis, the language understanding service, comes in, okay? And the great thing about Lewis is that to set it up, you don't actually need to be that technical. When you integrate it, maybe under the hood, it's a slightly different matter. And to be fair, like, Lewis is generally associated with the building of chatbots and understanding, the human's initial request or intent, okay? And Lewis is, it's a service that sits up in the cloud. As I say, there's an online dashboard, and what you do is you build out this data model or this language model, and over time it starts to learn based on the utterances that you've fed it, which utterance. So an utterance is what somebody said, which bucket that should go in, and it saves you from having to go through the manual process of maintaining a classifier and the test data and all that sort of thing. And it's so very quick overview of like the main components in a Lewis application, right? So I've kind of touched on some of them. So there are an utterance, an intent, and an entity. And the utterance, what the user said. The intent, so for me it was I'm looking to identify a sales lead. And the entity, and these are data points that are of interest to you within an utterance, and you can label them through this online dashboard, okay? If you look over to the right, you can see where it says test up at the top. I've keyed in, I would like a new phone. And this actually exists in the Lewis console. Over to the right hand side, there's a black box, right? You got the utterance, I would like a new iPhone. The top scoring intent with 0.93 is the confidence scoring of that intent matching. So it's nearly 100% accuracy that we've identified a sales lead. The entities, and this is just, it says commercial item because that's what I'm interested in capturing. And you can also activate a sentiment feature as well, so you can add that other layer of intelligence onto that if you want to. So those are kind of like the key points. So it's like utterance, intent, and entity. And then here, maybe hard. Yep.
When you've got this edit the intent.
Is that in the pre?
Editing that,
Here.
Are you editing that number? Are you editing it intent as being a sales lead? And editing that figure of 0.933, or are you editing what sort of lead it is?
So this is. Sorry, I should have explained. This is just a test window. Like, so when you've built your language model and you've trained it, you have a snap-in that you can click on it, it pops out, and then you key in your utterance, and then this is just this is metadata that Lewis has been able to identify. So it's showing you here all the information that Lewis has been able to extract. If you click edit, I think what that allows you to do is reassign the intent. I don't. Yeah, so
okay.
so if you imagine like you're sitting, and I'm going to demo this actually, you're sitting at the web console, you're building up your language model, and people that aren't very technical can do this. You don't need the PhD in linguistics or text analytics to sort of do this stuff now, right? And through the dashboard, you create your intent, and then you add examples of utterances that match that intent, and then you go a little bit further, and then you can start to label entities within each.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you can build up a language model that then you can either, place into a chatbot, or you can take the endpoint that Lewis provides you with, and then you can plug that into your code, so you can then programmatically consume the intelligence. Yeah, and that's where the power is really. A common pattern is for when you're building chatbots. Right, this is quite an unorthodox deployment of the technology, but a common pattern is when you're building chatbots is to construct your language model, okay, seed it with the intents that you want the chatbot to handle, the utterances that you could kind of expect it to deal with, and the other good thing is that all your utterances, they don't have to match. It will figure out roughly what's the best match, and then when you've done that, you can then hand it over to the respective dialogue in your chatbot, and you can build up like real complex conversations, but with Lewis acting as like a switchboard, right? Yeah, and then through that you can orchestrate dialogues here, there, and so you could have one language model to deal with booking hotels. You could have one language model to deal with ordering food, and then so you can compartmentalize or componentize your logic. There are a few constraints.
Make a hash of it.
It gets down to the planning, right?
This would apply same with like Alexa or any other kind of spoken interface?
Yeah. So one of the MVPs, Gary Pretty, he's building some cool stuff that integrates Alexa with the Microsoft Bot Framework V4. Yeah. So there's quite a lot of activity, and there's a dedicated SDK, Bot Builder SDK. And it's open source, so anybody can contribute. Because like the other thing you can do is that you can build, like there's automation, right? You can, I don't know, Facebook Messenger, you can build a bot that sits in Facebook, but at the back end is the bot framework powered by Lewis. A little project that I worked on for Irish Ferries, they wanted a little bit of it gave them a buffer really. It was like an automated response with a little bit of intelligence, where you could have Lewis sitting behind that. So is like the direct message came in the form of a tweet. You can hand that you can throw it over the fence, let Lewis figure out the intent. If you can get access to some entities, great, and then you can push back the appropriate response or contact number rather than people hammering the phones. So it's quite versatile. As I say, a lot of people are using it for chatbot development. I was using it to help identify sales leads. Pardon me. So what I'll do, just to kind of give it a little bit more context, is I'll hop into the Lewis dashboard, and I'll just so you can actually see what I'm talking about. All right, so this is just a dev app at the moment, right? So here I've went straight into the intents for the Lewis application that I've created. As I say, I was interested in identifying sales leads, so I've created an intent called sales leads or sales lead, and then here we've got all the utterances. There's only 5. The reality is you probably have about 20 to 30 that represent your intent. So I've got how much are those new X? I think I'll get one of those new X. I was checking the new, and you get the picture, right? As I say, I took it a little bit further, and I labelled the various parts of the sentences where I believe the thing that I'm interested in would exist. And I'd only trained it with phones, so you can see here, but it doesn't have to be phone. It could be anything. That's just used as a placeholder. Okay. So you create your intents, you seed it with the utterances, and you optionally label it with entities. And then what you do is you publish it, and then what you get is you get an endpoint key, okay? And I'm speaking to the developers here, really, that endpoint key is what you basically use in your app. I don't know, you get X amount of free requests per month. I think it may be 5,000 or 10,000, but that information's available online. So you take your key, inject it into your app, and then you're good to go. And then you may be thinking, well, like what data do you get back? So what I've got is an example again. So I might get a new car, Lewis endpoint, then there's the query. So I trained Lewis with phones, but it doesn't care. Got sales lead, 66% confidence. It's found a commercial item at this location in the sentence, and it's got a score of like 72, and it's also identified some sentiment there. This example's probably a little bit similar to some of the other ones that we've looked at, but this is just showing you the data that you get back when you've made a request to the endpoint. Sorry, what? Okay. Can you? You've got, let me have a think. It's got the concept of patterns.
So it's have a range of products, wildcard represents.
So that's kind of like what this is giving you, right? Because it doesn't have. I've trained it with phone, right? But I've just the text isn't the important part. It's the words around it and the relationships to the words, like the what do you call it? The semantic orientation of and how those words connect with each other. I've trained it with phones, but I've supplied cars, and it's still able to identify that. So that in effect is like a wild card. Yeah.
I guess one sort of analysis I'm thinking of is, I've got a range of products.
Yeah.
Which one's most in demand? Which one most likely to.
So.
You're going to be able to do comparisons.
So what you could do, all right then. So what you get out of the box, you get a predefined list of domain models. So like one of the things that I looked at was, I might get a new car, right? But in the web dashboard, and I've seen this, Lewis will auto-suggest models for you, like A3, A5, it will, and as you start to key in the utterances, it will auto-suggest these things. And yet there's like I don't know how many there are, but you get a predefined list of actual domain models that you can just set up a Lewis application and say, I want you to deal with holiday bookings. And it will just, out the box, produce this language model that deals with that. It will deal with the patterns and stuff, but like in terms of wildcards, I think this is kind of like giving you that, because like I've trained it with phones, but here I've keyed in, I'm looking for a new car. Makes sense? happy to talk after the
I'll keep it.
session. So, let's see. So enough about the dashboard. What I'd like to do now is just share how you can actually consume this in using like .NET code. So what I've got is another example here. I ain't gonna handcraft it, I've got it here. Same thing going on, passing in the key, setting the endpoint, pulling it back. This time I'm not using the dedicated SDK. I've handcrafted like the objects, right? So we're gonna pass in the text and we're gonna see what it brings back. So I'm thinking of getting a new phone. Any recommendations? Right. And so you get back the entity, which is phone, commercial item. It's got all of the intents that we've trained in our Lewis application. It's got the query, and then it's got the top scoring intent, which is, it's got sales lead. It's pretty low, 20% confidence. But that's the sort of a sample of the information that you can get back. So what was I able to do with Lewis? Well, it saved me a ton of work because I didn't have to like code for those nuances that we discussed. I was able to build like a scalable API. It just removed a lot of headaches. And the upshot was that I was able to like point this API at any data really. It just so happened to be Twitter data and the Twitter API, and more recently the Instagram and Facebook graph APIs, and surface insights such as sales leads, sentiment, key phrases and analytics, and then surface all that information in dashboards. And like what happened at the end of it, all of that was I had a solution that I could just then use to target people at the right time with the right message really. And that was one of the things that I was looking to do. And the upshot of it all was that with these activities I was able to get access to like more consumer data before it hit the market through Twitter. I built the relationships, but and that ain't on the hard sell, right? I ain't, but like it would have took me much longer to do this stuff if I never started using like some of these APIs. As I say, I get access to the like stuff from Twitter, like, you know, household income levels, car ownership, value, professions, like all these audience insights way before they were going to release them to the market. And that, you know, this actually helped me just ship quicker. I don't have any more, there's loads more to go at. I've covered quite a bit. I just touched the tip of the iceberg with this stuff. There's loads more that you can do with it. As I say, chatbots is a growing space right now. I'm doing a lot with chatbots. So if anybody's got any questions, happy to take them, try and answer them. If I can't, take them offline. And I just want to thank everybody for their patience and time.